How y'all doing? Now, allow me to introduce myself. My name is
Shandy the Squire.
and most people round here call me,
Shingy.
but you can call me,
Shandy.
yeah, I've been living here
Editing hell.
for now going on 72 years, and I guess I've been playing this guitar for about 63 of those years. Now, times have changed a lot here,
Movie discourse.
but I tell you what it seems. You know, life in general always come back,
Raimi Spider-Man.
and not just any
Spider-Man.
mind you, the
Worst one.
one the good Lord wants you to.
Criticize.
Now, for instance, take my little ball friends
Peter.
and Mary Jane.
Watson.
Now, see,
Peter.
that boy is a character. Yes, sir. He's at school, but see, he really don't want to be there. No. And I have a feeling that he's going to try, and I mean try, to persuade Mary Jane to get out of there with him. You know, that old school reminds me of a little music place that used to be right there on that spot. Now, that was a few days ago, 1952 days. Me and old Tubbs Johnson. Now,
Hi. It's me again. I've decided to do another one of these since the last one did alright. Well, alright enough for a channel of my size. Thanks for the support on that, by the way. It means a lot. Hopefully this video will do even better, and what a video it shall be. This time around I have decided to dig my heels into the deep soil as I try to tug and heave at this beloved piece of cinema. I am of course referring to critiquing Spider-Man 2, the film known as having the prestigious honor of not only being considered the best in the Raimi series, the best Spider-Man movie to date, but also one of the best superhero movies ever made by many. And if you are one of these people and you do not wish to have that opinion altered, then I encourage you to click off this video immediately, because I have set out to prove that notion wrong. But if you are interested in knowing what I found, then please stay and perhaps free up some time to watch this, because as you can see, it's quite a lengthy specimen. Now many of you are probably already aware of Southpaw's video on this film, and are probably wondering, what more could I add that warrants the leap in length? Well, after that video's release, me, him, and a gang of other merry haters all came together and found quite a few more issues with this movie. And so the goal of this video will be to discuss those extra problems, as well as all the stuff I found to be strange or a little annoying during my rewatch. And again, as always, I would like to clarify that not every problem I found can be seen as harmful to the overall story or narrative, but unlike the last video, there are a lot more that can be seen that way in this movie. Now before I deep dive into this, I'd like to get my fair share of praise for this movie out of the way first. Growing up, this was my all-time favorite motion picture for many reasons. The acting was amazing, the music was phenomenal, I cried, I laughed, I enjoyed it. This movie took the cheesy cartoon fun at the first and ground it into something a little bit more believable and realistic. At least so I thought when I was young. It had possibly the greatest comic book villain I had ever seen in a movie at this point. The action was cool and engaging, the story had more drama and stakes between the characters, and JJ was back for an even more memorable role than he had in the first. It essentially was everything I wanted and more for a sequel, and is probably the biggest reason I got into liking Spider-Man as a kid. I still have some fondness for this movie, but like all things in life, even my nostalgia for Spider-Man 2 would fade as I gazed upon it with fresh eyes and looked away horrified. The new lens Southpaw had given me during our debate has molded my experience with this movie, as well as superhero media in general, and while I would like to think it was for the better, I can't help but feel like it has become harder for me to enjoy movies in this genre. I've never been the biggest fan of superhero media despite having a few soft spots, but now I actively dislike or am uninterested by a lot of it. A big reason for this isn't actually what I discovered about Spider-Man 2. Instead it was seeing the bubonic plague of shitty opinions and defenses for this particular brand of Cape Kino. The same people who had criticized the likes of the sequel trilogy, the MCU, the DCEU, and many more were now defending this movie as if it was their sacred duty, and it made me ill. Now I don't want to turn this into a rant about opinions online because that is not what you are here for. I just thought it would help if I gave a bit more of my history as context for why I might be doing this. I also just want you all to be aware that there is still much to praise in this movie, which I will point out as I go along, but the nature of this video will be predominantly negative, as you may have picked up based on the title. So if that isn't your thing, then I understand. But I would appreciate it if you didn't project those feelings onto me or my video. After all, I'm just doing this for fun. So with that out of the way, let's lose our powers, pay our rent, and open our caviar as we take a look at the most popular Spider-Man movie of all time. So the movie begins with a similar opening to the first, even using the same music. However, the difference here is instead of a reliance on CGI models, this movie opens using illustrations and drawings for scenes and characters from the first film, giving the opening a very artistic feel to it, for lack of a better word. The illustrations very likely could have been used to assist with the feeling of watching a comic book movie, as they are meant to reflect panels of the comic. Whatever the reason was though, doesn't particularly matter, since it was done very well and is a welcome change to the first opening. It's also great to know Danny Elfman has returned to score this movie, and what a brilliant job he's done. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I've always felt the music in the second movie was better than the first, despite feeling very similar. I'm no music buff, so I couldn't really explain to you why I feel this way, even if I wanted, so take that with the grain of salt you'd expect. All in all, it's a good opening and gets the excitement flowing whenever starting this flick up again. As the credits finish, we are met with a billboard of MJ's face, with Peter narrating in the background. He gives us a recap of what happened at the end of the last movie, sort of, and makes it clear to the audience that he can't be with MJ, as he has been tasked with the responsibility of being Spider-Man, giving him the duty to protect the citizens of New York City from crime, dangerous hazards, and potential supervillains on the same level as himself. This gives us an insight into his moral code and mimics the sort of stoic vigilantism from characters such as Batman and Daredevil. We are also given a time frame for how long he has been doing this for from Aunt May, after his birthday party, which is almost 2 years. So for almost 2 years he has been the sole protector of his community, meaning he has been needing to figure out a way to live as someone with 2 identities for almost 2 years. And quite frankly, I'm not impressed with the results, but I will get into that later. For now, I want to acknowledge his feelings towards MJ in the opening. It's been 2 years since Peter rejected MJ's advances, and yet he still hasn't moved on. This isn't a problem since he very clearly loved her in the first movie, and this is a common thing that happens in the real world. But I find it odd to start the movie with Peter faltering in his responsibility that he felt so dedicated to upholding in the last movie. I understand that he would miss her and feel some element of regret for not telling her how he feels, but one would also expect that he would learn how to cope with this element of his life a little bit better, instead of almost crashing into his new boss the first time we see him. Speaking of almost crashing, for someone whose gimmick is with great power comes great responsibility, it wasn't very responsible of you to almost injure your boss because you took your eyes off the road. But ah well, no harm done. So Peter gets off of the bike and tries to excuse himself for being late by saying there was a disturbance, and the reaction we get from Aziz cements the idea that this is a common occurrence for Peter. We get confirmation for this when he offers Peter the ultimatum of delivering a pizza in an impossible time frame or face the consequences of unemployment. However, before we get to that part, we see Peter quickly tucking his mask into his jacket pocket. But, Peter, you have a backpack on you. Why did you think the best idea for hiding your mask was to put it in there? Whatever. We move into the restaurant and Aziz gives Peter his ultimatum. Deliver these 8 deep dish extra large pizzas within the time frame of 8 minutes while traversing 42 blocks in New York City during the middle of the day. Okay. Now I know some people have criticized this scene before because it makes no sense that the pizza owner could expect Peter to feasibly make this delivery on time, especially since it's supposed to be a 42 block trip, so why even bother? What they forget to acknowledge is that even if the delivery is late, he still needs to make it because that is his job. With that in mind, however, we need to question Aziz's decision to give a 29-minute guarantee to everyone who orders from his restaurant while living within a 42 block radius of the restaurant. According to that website, it takes about 4 to 5 minutes to make one pizza in an oven that is cooking at 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I don't know what kind of oven Aziz is using, so I can't correctly estimate its size or how long it takes to make pizzas. However, if we were to look at the Medina 2G pizza oven, an oven intended for larger restaurants or pizzerias that offer delivery, we can see that they serve an average of 200 pizzas an hour. That's pretty impressive. But how many is that per minute? Well, if you divide the number of pizzas by the number of minutes in an hour, you get 3 pizzas per minute. That's 8 pizzas in 3 minutes, not including prep time, only oven time. This is, however, also a modern-day, top-of-the-range, quality commercial oven for professional chefs, and would most likely not be available for Aziz, who is struggling financially in the movie, as we can see by him worrying about losing one customer. But we can still use this oven as a reference to figure out how many pizzas he can make at once. So if we use the 3 pizzas per oven calc we used before, along with the 4 to 5 minutes make time given to us by the link mentioned, then we come to 8 pizzas in 12 minutes, not including prep time. That's still okay, isn't it? If Peter was on time, he would still have 17 minutes to make the delivery, right? Well, if we were to convert 42 blocks into miles, we would get 2.1 miles. Now stay with me here, this is going to be pretty interesting. According to this website, a mobility report was done in 2017 which had the average travel speed for Manhattan's central business district drop to 7.1 miles per hour, with average bus travel speeds dipping to 7.44 miles per hour in 2016. Now while it might seem unfair, considering this is 13 years later, I would like you to keep in mind that due to the increase of public transportation, such as buses and trains shown in this data, as well as the increase in walking and cycling, we are actually getting few people driving, which is also shown by the decrease in vehicle usage from the same report. So this means the travel speeds would actually be faster, making this a high-end calculation. So if we take the average speed of 7.1 miles per hour and divide that by 42 blocks, or 2.1 miles, we would get 0.29 hours or 17 minutes. Uh-oh, Scooby-Doo, what the hell is going to happen now? If Peter only had 17 minutes left to make the delivery, but the distance he needs to travel will take him 17 minutes, how does he deliver the pizza on time? Well, Shandy, the answer is he doesn't. It is impossible for him to make this delivery even after giving the travel speed the benefit of the doubt and making it statistically faster. This is also while not including the prep time to make the pizza or the traffic he would have had on that day. How in the unlawfully wedded wife fornicating fuck would Peter be expected to make this delivery on time? Go! Oh, and don't give me that bullshit of him being Spider-Man. Aziz does not know that. This entire operation was flawed from the start. Good God, we are off to a strong start with this video. Now, I understand that Aziz would have an issue with Peter not being dependable, but how is Peter expected to be dependable if the deliveries themselves are bloody impossible, you jumbo dumbo? Also, Aziz, if Peter is expected to make a delivery in less than 8 minutes while traversing 42 blocks, then why are you blabbering on for so fucking long? Jesus, if you just told him the fucking destination and gave him the pizzas, you would have saved him 40 seconds by the time he got off the scooter. You just wanted to fire him, didn't you? I can't decide whether you are based or just an arsehole for making Peter do this. So Aziz gives Peter the pizzas and he is off, showing us his driving abilities as he almost crashes twice in the span of a few seconds. Deciding to not waste his time anymore, he runs into an alleyway to change, and we get our first glimpse of the Spider-Man suit for this movie. And I have to say, I like it a lot. It's essentially the same suit from the first movie, however with some subtle changes, namely the decision to enhance the red and darken the blue, giving us a more iconic appearance that would be kept for the next 2 movies, and very likely would have been kept in the 4th had it not been cancelled. This suit-up scene also makes us realize that Peter always has a suit on him, which makes sense as he would need to be called to action at any given moment. But speaking of Peter, where's your clothes and shoes? In this shot we see you run into an alleyway and come back out in your skin-tight Spider-Man outfit. But in the next shot we see you emerging out of a broom closet wearing your full civilian getup, including your jacket and shoes. Where were you hiding all of this, and don't you think it would have been a good idea to take all of your clothes and put them into your backpack instead of putting your suit on top of your normal clothes? It seems like you legitimately just access an item equip screen everywhere you go in order to unequip and re-equip your clothes at the moment's notice, instead of going through the very time-consuming task of taking your suit out of the bag, putting each item on separately, and then leaving the backpack behind for some unknown reason. Why are you making the simplest of tasks so bloody difficult, Parker? As Peter is swinging through the city, he notices 2 kids about to be hit by a truck, so he tosses the pizzas aside and goes to save the kids. And here we have yet another example of parental negligence in these movies, with it being at the most inconvenient of times too. Actually, it's just negligence at this point since we get an example of it between 2 people who aren't even related later in the movie. Awesome! Spidey, before you leave, are you not going to ask where these kids' parents are? What kind of superhero just leaves 2 kids alone without adult supervision after they've already shown a disregard for their own well-being? The fuck? And don't pull that nonsense reasoning of, they understand the danger now and would listen to him, because that is not how small children are programmed. Anyways, Spidey goes to pick up his pizzas, which have been dropped off on this dude's apartment balcony. This same random citizen thought he could then help himself to some free pizza, so Peter needs to quickscope it out of his hand. I'm fine with Peter making the shot, even if the angle seems a bit fishy, but damn dude, you definitely got some webs in that slice of pizza. So apparently Peter got into this building by presumably crawling through an air vent similar to the way they do it in a lot of the video games, and just so happened to find an unoccupied janitor's closet on the right floor he needed to go to. Alright then. Peter, why are you worrying about the fucking brooms, man? Just deliver your pizzas to the woman right in front of you and come back to clean it up when you are done. Did he know he was already late and decided to mess about? If so, then why does he look so surprised and annoyed here? And why doesn't this lady question why her pizza delivery guy just walked out of the bloody broom closet? Okay, to be fair, she looks like she's honestly just given up at this point, which is a mood I can relate to. I just want my pizzas too. So moving on. We now have Peter being flamed by Mr. Aziz for not making the deliveries on time, with the awful time frame he was given, lecturing Peter on the meaning of a promise, which may or may not be a common theme for the rest of this movie, since he isn't the only character to lecture Peter based on a broken premise. This 29 minutes promise of yours must not have been so serious to you if you willingly gave Peter the crappiest possible time frame to deliver these pizzas, being the 42 blocks in 29 minutes or less guarantee. Considering that during my pizza making calc I didn't even account for the prep time, just the bake time. Okay, I've decided to make up my mind on the situation. Aziz is a confirmed based individual. He knows Peter's a fuckwit who can't hold a job to save his life and regularly doesn't make deliveries on time. So he decided to take any hope of keeping this job away from him by giving him an impossible task. Reminds me of Alfred, honestly. Go! But really, fuck this place for thinking a 42 block delivery in New York City was even remotely possible in the allotted time frame. And with that said, Peter is now fired from his second job, meaning this should realistically affect his financial situation pretty drastically. Right? The next scene reintroduces us to J.K. Simmons reprising his role as J. Jonah Jameson, and is just as great as the first movie. Simply astonishing work as always. This scene itself also doesn't really have any noticeable flaws. However, I'm going to ask a question for Peter, which was a point I made in my last video, link in the description if you haven't checked that out already, and that is, why haven't you tried going to another newspaper publisher? You just lost a job and you aren't making enough money to pay your rent. Yet you rely on Jameson to pay you your measly amount of money that doesn't even cover an advance you took a few weeks before. Like man, your name is in every newspaper concerning Spider-Man, which credits you as the only person who can take his photograph. People would kill to hire you. This will not be the last time I mention Peter's financial situation, so be prepared. We move over to Peter's college and damn man, are people here just complete dicks for no particular reason? I know you all have places to be, but do you need to step all over his books? That just seems spiteful, to be honest. But then again, we are dealing with the most abhorrent and vicious creatures on the planet.
A New York citizen.
As Peter picks his books up, he runs into Dr. Connors, making his first official appearance in these movies, and he explains to Peter that he is failing his class, only really having one last chance with his paper on Dr. Octavius. I'd like to know something. If Peter's grades are steadily declining, then that would mean at one point his grades were of an acceptable level which would allow him to pass. That also means at some point in his college career, he was capable of maintaining school, his job on OnlyFans, his responsibility of being a superpowered vigilante, as well as being a pizza delivery guy for a garbage restaurant which will probably end up going under in the near future whenever he was hired. So at one point in his career did he start falling back on his grades? No idea, and the movie doesn't address it. He is just supposed to be an extremely exhausted and financially unstable individual despite having the ability to traverse distances faster than any motor vehicle in New York City, making him the ideal delivery boy had he thought of getting into costume using a less retarded fashion. He can also spam photos of himself just swinging through the city and deliver those images to multiple newspaper publishers throughout the city, raking in all of the amateur photographer money that comes with it. Jameson wouldn't even dare fire him, for real that is, because he even admits Peter's the only one who can take his photos, and Peter wouldn't even need to justify his actions because Jameson is already aware of his financial difficulties. I can see this becoming an issue for him when assignments start becoming more challenging, requiring more time to finish, meaning less time swinging around as Spider-Man. Due to this, he could focus more of his attention on the superhero business instead of school. But did he not think this was going to happen? This isn't really a big point of mine, it's just something I thought of while watching. My big contention is going to arrive when we discuss his financial struggles and the Spider-Man No More arc, so stay tuned. After Peter's day at uni, he rides his bike back to Aunt May's place to celebrate his birthday. I could make a remark about why he needed to visit her if he didn't know it was his birthday, but I always just took it as him being humble and joking around. So Peter has a chance to catch up with MJ and Harry after not seeing them for a while. We never get told how long ago he last saw them, but considering his life and how busy something like college and a job can keep you, it would be safe to assume a few months to even a year. It's also possible this is the first time he has seen MJ since the funeral from the first movie. I imagine Peter doesn't get much free time, so this estimation doesn't seem unlikely. During this catch-up, we find out MJ has fulfilled her dreams of acting on stage, and Harry has taken over Oscorp Industries. How he managed to do that isn't really something I understand, since this was never a family company, and I don't imagine Norman as the kind of person to make sure he gave Harry ownership of it in his will. Maybe Harry became owner after holding a predominant amount of the shares? I don't know, and that's not really a point of discussion. The discussion comes when Harry brings up how Peter doesn't return his calls, asking him if the reason Peter has been busy is because of him taking pictures of Spider-Man. Harry, do you really think it's a good idea to bring up such a sensitive topic at your friend's birthday party before you start getting drunk? Also, why was your first reaction to Peter saying he was busy, asking him if it was because of the bug? Surely you would know and understand that Peter's a college student now, even though you both moved out of the apartment you shared in the city, right? Actually, that's a good point to bring up. Why did you move out of that apartment, Harry? Or was it Peter who moved out first? But then why would he do that only to get a rinky-dink run-down apartment that looks like the living room equivalent of the booger Shrek sneezed out in his second movie? A far more impressive sequel and an overall better film, might I add. It kinda seems like a dickish move on Harry's part if he forces Peter to move out, because Peter is not financially stable and he would struggle to make it on his own, as he barely does in this movie. Where if it was Peter, then it seems extremely impractical since he now needs to spend even more money he doesn't have on living accommodations. None of this even addresses the cause of leaving either. I could see Harry wanting to leave, preferring to stay on his own after his father passed away, but I don't see Harry from the first movie as the kind of person to leave Peter hanging out to dry like that. The only way I could see that is if they had a massive falling out, possibly over Peter taking pictures of Spider-Man. This would be a very interesting conflict to see, and it would explain why Peter changes accommodation in this movie, a rather important piece of scenery since it plays a key role in the events that happen later in the movie. It would also explain why Peter doesn't take Harry's calls if the excuse of he's busy wasn't enough to go by, since I know there are people who watch this movie who don't realize just how busy college students can be. Honestly, the hostility towards Peter here seems to come out of nowhere, because at the end of the last movie, Harry was thankful to have Peter as the only family left in his life. I'm certain that Butler will remember that remark.
If I may, sir, I've seen things in this house I've never spoken of.
And he housed zero resentment towards him at the funeral for Peter's position in all of this, adding yet another point of needing to show why they moved out of the apartment they shared. We kind of need to know why their relationship is this fragmented, because otherwise it just leaves the viewer trying to fill in the blanks in their heads instead. And we know how bad that can get. Anyways, moving on with the rest of the party. After that uneasy greeting, we find out Harry is now head of special projects at Oscorp, and that he is funding Otto Octavius' research in fusion, offering Peter a chance to meet him when he says he is writing a paper on Otto. Isn't it just really convenient that Harry is funding Otto Octavius just as Peter needed to write a paper on him, and is willing to introduce Peter to him on the day Kirk Connors told Peter he would fail him? Now again, I am fine with coincidences happening in movies since they happen all the time in the real world. However, with that said, I thought this was supposed to be the movie that showed Peter suffering the consequences of being Spider-Man. Seems awfully strange to do something like this so early in the movie. Hopefully we don't see any more cases of Peter being unfairly rewarded for massively fucking up. So after that, Harry encourages Peter to pursue MJ, stating she struggles to take her eyes off of him or something like that. When Peter declines, stating he is too busy, Harry retorts by again asking him about Spider-Man, and here is where we get a glimpse of what could have broken their friendship apart in the first place. Now there's a lot of information that needs to be addressed about the last movie that ultimately gets ignored in favor of having Harry be antagonistic towards Peter. I can't really fault Spider-Man 1 for this, as those events happen at the climax of the movie, meaning any sort of fallout or consequences would then need to be addressed in the sequel. Examples include the already mentioned conflict between Harry and Peter, but what about addressing the issue of Norman's body? What about his suit and his glider even? However, I do feel like these are talking points that are more situated for Spider-Man 3, as this conflict meets its breaking point in that movie and is a key element to its story, so I shall wait to discuss this then. Gives me more breathing room to work with the autism we have left. After the party is finished, we see Peter squeaking a look at Aunt May's mail, where he glimpses a notice of foreclosure, meaning Aunt May is behind on her payments. What follows is probably one of the best scenes in the movie, as Aunt May breaks down at the fact she can't even afford to give her surrogate son a proper birthday gift, offering him $20 since that is all she can afford. This then leads to her reminiscing about Uncle Ben, which just adds on to Peter's ever-building guilt, something that is further explored after they visit his uncle's grave. Aunt May's scenes in this movie are probably the most consistently well-written scenes since they break literally nothing, at least if it's not in the bank. It's just some good old-fashioned character work. But enough of that, let's move on to the next scene. Similar to the last movie, we get a shot of Peter taking out the trash only to be met up by MJ. However, this time she is waiting for him instead of arriving at the same time. She approaches him and they begin chatting.
It's nice, I get to see you every day now.
This dialogue is cringe as fuck, and I hate it. Even as a kid, I hated watching most scenes between MJ and Peter because they always felt awkward. The scenes between them always came off as very stilted and forced, as well as lacking the chemistry of the first movie, and there may actually be a reason for this. According to the director's commentary for this movie, Toby said that after having to retake so many scenes, he kind of lost the drive for them, with Kirsten Dunst being praised as the only one between the two who had the energy to retake every scene properly. This could explain why their scenes feel so disarranged a lot of the time, because they don't seem like conversations between friends anymore, and the awkwardness feels out of place, considering they history. But this is more the opinion side of argumentation, as I'm sure there are those of you who felt their acting and chemistry was fine, if not good. It just bugs me.
You're such a mystery.
Sexual harassment.
I'm seeing somebody now.
You mean like a boyfriend?
Well, like, I like him.
Excuse me?
Oh my god, MJ, you giga bitch! You, not more than 5 seconds ago, were caressing Peter's face and goading him into kissing you. You basically made him sport his shorts at the touch of your hand, and now that he rejected your advances, again mind you, you felt it necessary to bring up the fact that you were dating someone else? Not to mention that you even question his shock, like it's a motherfucking surprise to you. Then what do you do with all this new information? You provoke Peter into going to see your stupid fucking play, when you should know damn well he doesn't have the fucking money to buy a bloody ticket. More on that in a minute. Not to mention you are also aware of how busy Peter has been over the last 2 years, with the fact he is now a college student as well as working on the side to pay for a shitty apartment he can barely afford to keep. A shitty apartment you are aware of at the end of this movie, despite never fucking visiting him any time on screen before that point. But, do you want to know the real shocker here? The thing that ticks me off the most about this scene. I, for the longest time, never noticed just how much of a cunt MJ was in this scene. This movie, even. I, like many of you, grew up watching this flick, and no more than 6 months ago, at the time of writing and recording the script, considered this feature to be one of the best superhero movies I had ever seen, as well as it being my all-time favourite motion picture. When I get angry at this scene, I am not only getting angry at MJ, but I am also getting angry at myself for taking so long to notice this. But I ask myself, why did it take me so long? What was it about this scene that prevented me from noticing this glaring issue? It's the music. Danny Elfman's score is used to great effect here, since its main purpose is distracting us from registering what was said. The purpose of the scene is to give us a sense of intimacy between the two characters, as well as create some urgency in Peter as he realizes he might miss his window of opportunity to win MJ's heart, if he doesn't attend her play. The music is used to assist with this as it plays a soft and gentle melody, adding to the goal of creating an intimate moment. This is reminiscent of the scene they shared together in the hospital after Aunt May was attacked in Spider-Man 1. If I'm not mistaken, it's actually the exact same music, which makes sense as it tries to invoke the same sort of feelings from the audience.
And she's looking back in yours.
Shut the fuck up, you cunt!
Elfman's music does the job of slowly but surely working its way into the hearts of the audience, because that is where it will sit for the rest of this movie. The music assists tremendously in forcing the audience to feel the required emotions of each scene, from happy and romantic,
Had to do what I had to do.
to triumphant and powerful, to somber and serious.
And these monstrous things should be at the bottom of the river.
Each of these scenes benefits tremendously from the music, and it's nothing less than the same for this scene. If you can't tell, I think the music in this movie is great, by the way. But the music isn't the only thing that tries to prevent me from wanting to slap MJ with a frozen fish. The movie doesn't actually acknowledge what MJ is doing here as slimy, and in fact enforces the notion that Peter should pursue her despite rejecting her advances, as well as not possessing the necessary funds needed to attend her play. From Peter narrating his desire for her in the opening scene, to Harry encouraging him to pursue her, as well as every other scene involving the estranged couple following this moment. The movie desperately wants these two to be together, but never has them putting in the equal amounts of effort to make this desire become a reality. If you don't understand what I mean by this, then allow me to explain. MJ is never called out for her behavior. She never faces any consequences for her actions, and doesn't lose anything or anyone important to her as a result of her manipulative tendencies. Well, anyone besides John. We as the audience are also expected to take a side in most of the discrepancies, because Peter is consistently depicted as either in the wrong or out of luck, despite not necessarily needing to fall into either category. But when referring to this scene specifically, the thing that makes it so much worse is that when MJ finds out Peter will attend her play, her first reaction isn't something reflective of gratitude or joy. It is instead one of a massively smug cunt when she says,
Don't disappoint me.
I won't.
This is the first time you are seeing Peter in what we can assume to be years since he dumped your ginger ass back at that grave, and again, during that time, Peter has put himself through college, a task which on its own is already extremely understandable as anyone going through college will tell you. But on top of that, he has a new job atop his original one, as well as possibly many more he very likely couldn't keep due to his superior side activities. Something you admit to knowing at the end of the movie, and something you had already figured out at the end of the last one, but that you conveniently forgot about so that this tismically gay drama could transpire. All of this on top of the fact he simply can't afford to tend your play. Something you should know damn well about considering you visit his apartment at the end of the movie. I also refuse to believe you didn't catch a glimpse of that foreclosure notice while helping Aunt May in the kitchen. But that is enough rambling for now. Why don't we progress further down this inane rabbit hole? Peter leaves Aunt May's and arrives at his own apartment. Here we are introduced to Mr. Dickovich, played by Eli Baskin, as well as his daughter Ursula, played by Magina Tova, who are much welcomed additions to this film as they add a lot of the comedy as well as one of the best moments of stress relief for Peter. After we introduce to the second best character in this movie, we see that the $20 Aunt May gave Peter is snatched away by the rent goblin, despite it being the only money he has to see him through the week. This is because Peter is behind on his rent payments by over a month.
Again.
So Dickovich ain't hearing any of it, and quite frankly, he shouldn't have to. I don't know many landlords that will just allow you to be late on your rent payments by more than a month multiple times. Dickovich doesn't even pester Peter with eviction notices. He just asks him for rent whenever he sees him, but besides that, Peter appears to be able to live autonomously. Another issue that will be made more apparent when examined after the Spider-Man No More arc starts. Peter stands in absolute shock as he witnesses his money being taken and Ursula burning the kitchen. Moving on. As we arrive inside of Peter's apartment for the first time, we actually get to see just how shitty his life has become since living with Harry in Spider-Man 1. However, the first thing I tend to notice upon repeat viewings now is this little brown cabinet near the door, which appears to be housing peanut butter atop it. And yes folks, it is about that time again, where I needlessly start bringing up points that no one has ever bothered thinking about, because why would they need to? And again, you do not have to consider these points as valid, because quite frankly, it does not affect anything in this movie. I think. The point I'm about to mention is, how many calories does Peter have to consume daily to maintain a life as Spider-Man? Yes, we are indeed going to talk about this. So for this section, I've gone about it in two different ways. The first is a bit tricky because I imagine Peter would burn a lot of calories during his time web swinging, simply due to the amount of movement he is doing, not to mention the times he has to throw some hands. So my first instinct was to look at Pro Boxer's calorie intake as it seemed to make the most sense. But then I stopped and realized, Peter would spend more time swinging around New York, crawling up buildings, saving civilians, and doing parkour. So upon realizing this, I figured the best diet to look at for comparisons was that of a parkour athlete. However, despite this, I'm still going to be looking at some boxing diet and calorie information, simply due to the fact Spider-Man would be often fighting criminals. So I've decided to try and mix them by incorporating both diets and calorie intakes. The second will be regarding his ability to create organic webs, so I feel the only apt comparison to make here is with actual spiders. But please feel free to take all of this with a grain of salt, because it could very easily be explained that Peter does not need to consume many calories to maintain his lifestyle. Nevertheless, since there is nothing in these movies which states that being the case, I think I'm safe to proceed on anyway. Let us first discuss the Pro Boxer and parkour comparison. Now this may not be as different as I initially thought, because according to superproof.co.uk, a daily diet that consists of 4,000 calories should ideally have between 1,800 and 2,200 calories of quality carbs, resulting in 550 grams of food weight. This seems to line up with the parkour diet because according to parkourgenerations.com, carbs are very important due to them maintaining glycogen levels in the body, which are essential for things like increasing time till exhaustion, decreasing rate of perceived exhaustion during physical training, which is just a long way of saying you don't feel as tired, as well as increasing the intensity of how hard you work, something that would be essential to Spider-Man, who has to work on maximum effort basically all the time. Now for most pro athletes, even some casual ones, this wouldn't be an issue because for many of them they average out at 6 meals a day. According to BritishBoxingNews.co.uk, an article on pro boxer Nick Webb, he averages out on a meal every 2.5 to 3 hours. Both diets also necessitate the consumption of lots of water, about 4 liters or a gallon per day. Again, not really difficult for these people. But Peter? Nah, he barely has enough time in his day to properly dress himself most of the time. When is he supposed to consume all of this food and water? This is also while assuming he only needs this much food and not something more equivalent to someone like a strongman. According to the world's strongest man.com, a training strongman can devour up to 10,000 calories a day. That's more than 3 times the daily intake of tennis champion Andy Murray, and is only 5,000 calories fewer than what a grown horse can consume in a day. Imagine how different this movie would be if we saw Peter consuming 7 chickens a day. It's not like we see Peter lifting heavy weights or traversing great distances that would warrant him consuming this much food in a day. Oh, and if someone gets finicky with me because I'm bringing this up in this movie, it applies to all of the Spider-Man movies unless stated otherwise. But before I get carried away, why don't I look at the second method of measuring how many calories he needs to intake, using the spider comparison. So for this I needed to figure out how many calories a spider needs to consume daily to live. To accomplish that goal, I used worldbuilding.stockexchange.com, which used an average tarantula as their spider example. According to one case they used, the tarantula, weighing in at 200 grams, ate between 5 and 50 calories per day to survive. But for their calculations, they used 25 calories per day as that was the medium range. They did this to figure out how many calories that same spider would need per day if they were supersized to represent the fantasy spiders from stories like Lord of the Rings or Skyrim, and made them 40 kgs. This was about 200 times the size of a regular tarantula, at least according to the website, which meant that the average amount of calories needed a day was a whopping 5,000 calories. That's 2 times the average amount required for an adult male, at least according to www.nhs.uk. Keep in mind that this is not accounting for the amount of physical activity the spider is doing that day, only how much it ate. I would also like to mention that according to earthkind.com, spiders don't actually need to eat often and can survive up to 4 weeks without food. However, if insects are readily available, they will eat frequently, up to 4 times a day. And despite them getting most of their moisture from food, they still also need water, with many spiders tending to live near sources of water due to it being necessary for survival as well as it being useful for attracting prey. Now for the hard question. Why am I telling you this? Why am I bringing up how many calories a spider needs as well as how thirsty they can get? Well, that's easy. It's so I could show you how absurd this can really get. If you were to take the 40 kilogram calc and transfer it to Peter, we could get a very rough, anti-smooth, irregular, coarse, rugged, absolutely prickly estimate of how many calories Peter would likely need to consume daily if he doesn't go on a hunger strike for 4 weeks. For this we needed to look up Tobey Maguire's weight at the time of filming, which is 70 kgs or 155 pounds, at least according to superherojack.com. So now in order to get the correct units here, we first divide 70 by 40 to find out the appropriate multiplier, which is 1.75. Then we take the 200 time multiplier for the spider and multiply it again by 1.75, which leaves us with a 350 times multiplier. Then in order to find out how many calories the human spider hybrid, known as Peter Parker, would likely need to consume daily, we times 350 by 25 calories per day to get a whopping 8,750 calories per day. Now I swear I was joking with the strongman comparison. That's absolutely insane! If we converted that number into kilograms using a calorie calculator, we would get a whopping 1.15 kgs a day of food being eaten. If you were on a strict diet and exercise daily, you could expect to lose that amount in a week. It could also end up being more weight if we use this website from before. This would also account for how Peter manages to make his organic webbing so fast. It's not like he created that out of thin air, as it would likely need to be made using something. So if Peter is swinging around the city daily, he would most likely need to consume a shitload of calories to maintain it.
He will say something and then say the same thing again, only in a slightly different way.
Else he could very likely run out of steam.
Oh, that's the day he's done it again, that hurricane, that fucking dirty little... He's done it again!
Okay, let's do this right.
Else he could very likely run out of steam, making it seem like he's losing his powers. That wouldn't happen, could it? You wanna know something pretty funny? I can believe that Peter lives off of a regular pro athlete's diet of 4,000 calories a day, and at most will push it to say he eats just over the same amount as a fully grown man, between 2,500 and 3,000 calories a day, but only if this version of Peter is not using organic webs. That version seems far more likely to live like a normal person than the dude who shoots the white goo out of his wrists. Now, while this may seem to be an unnecessary tangent, since the amount of food he'd need to consume shouldn't necessarily be seen as a flaw, I would like to bring up my actual criticism regarding Peter's food intake. The thing that makes this worse is that there is no way Peter would be able to afford this much food considering his financial situation, or rather any food for that matter. No more than a couple of seconds ago, he had the only money he possessed for the week snatched out of his hands. And that cabinet doesn't look like it houses a packed fridge of food. He's also not getting paid by Jameson until he either delivers more pictures or attends the party for Jameson's son. No wonder the dude lost his powers in this movie. It wasn't because of love or the lost desire for great responsibility. The homie was just fucking hungry. Notice how the only time we see him eating anything he seems happy, and then days if not weeks later he gets his powers back? He just needed a fucking holiday to gas up the engines again. But with that said, it's time to move on. This section has been going on for long enough. So after failing to take a shower, we see Peter being introduced to Otto Octavius, played by Alfred Molina. I have nothing to say about the scene, but I want you all to remember some very important pieces of information this scene provides. Here we find out the fusion project Oscorp was funding was going towards the development of an artificial sun, meaning any and all safety precautions needed for the experiment would also be their responsibility, especially considering that their last big experiment led to several domestic terror attacks. As far as I'm concerned, Oscorp would want to avoid putting their heads into any more hot water. Another piece of important info is that Otto says the phrase,
"Intelligence is not a privilege, it's a gift, and you use it for the good of mankind."
Reason why this is important will be revealed by the time I get to the actual experiment. You lovely folks can just sit there and look as gorgeous as ever while you wait. Peter and Otto's conversation leads them towards the machine, but Peter gets to demonstrate his intelligence by correctly figuring out how it works. Otto then confirms Peter's deduction by saying he will create a huge amount of energy similar to a perpetual sun. Oh boy. I would also like to add that I have no issue with Otto being able to create this fictional machine and will not really be bothering criticizing how it functions, with some minor exceptions. This machine fits into the same category of comic booky science as Iron Man's armor and Cap's shield. As long as it remains consistent with its own rules, then I am fine with how it operates, just not how it's handled. Their conversation continues into the next scene, where we find our characters sitting inside Otto's apartment. Apparently, an entire hour has passed since the start of their conversation, and Otto has been convincing Peter he knows what he is doing. Would have been nice to see some of that. And hey, I didn't even realize, it's everyone's favorite scene, the Otto is arrogant scene, where he proclaims to know his experiment inside and out, and where he says,
"I certainly know the consequences of the slightest miscalculation."
And it is here where I will be calling out bullshit for the arrogance argument. I am sick to death of it. I was going to consider doing it during the actual experiment, but I figured this is as good a place as any. During the months of debating Raimi fans before, during, and after Southpaw's video was released, the one unifying argument they all had, and some who still have, was that the reason Otto didn't have any safety measures put in place for his experiment was because he was an arrogant man, since he did all of the calculations and knew every outcome. We are meant to now treat this arrogance as a character flaw, to help explain why he is such a megalodonic moron. Is megalodonic a word? I don't know, I don't care. It is now. This is not an argument I am willing to accept for a handful of reasons. The first one is that arrogance does not equal stupidity. A commonly accepted definition of arrogance is when a person believes they are better than others or that they know more than others, believing they are capable of performing feats beyond their capability. An example of arrogance is when a person believes they are never wrong. So you can see why people would resort to this claim almost immediately when defending Otto's actions. However, this doesn't take into account that arrogant people will not do things without making sure they are completely safe from any sort of negative feedback, especially if those same arrogant people are scientists. According to BBC.com, an article written in September of 2020, certain groups of people would encourage the development of inflated egos more so than others. A researcher by the name of Joey Cheng used bankers as an example, stating that their overconfidence tended to grow the more they spent time in their profession, but their teachers and other people working in education were not described this way, leading to the idea of different sectors experiencing it more than others. And wouldn't you know it, guess who is a friend of Otto? Now that I have this little piece of information available, I'd like to ask you all something. Do you think, in your heart of hearts, that Otto Octavius, A man with the mindset that tells him his intelligence is a gift that should be used for the betterment of mankind would risk harming mankind by not implementing safety protocols such as an off button, especially when surrounded by other scientists in his field, as well as having the head of Oscorp, or rather just Oscorp in general, overseeing the entire operation. Speaking of Oscorp, that is actually my second reason for why arrogance is a bullshit argument. Oscorp is already responsible for unleashing a domestic terror attack upon the city no more than 2 years before the events of this movie. It should be a PR nightmare for them to host such a dangerous experiment within city limits without any safety precautions. They would absolutely have a set of demands made ready for Otto before he started this demonstration. First one being to make sure no onlookers would face any level of danger. Christ, during the experiment there isn't even a sheet of glass to protect them in case anything bad happens. Not to mention a lack of protective eyewear as they stay into a fucking sun. If any of you don't want to take this point seriously, then I have something to share with you. Since common sense isn't enough to convince you that staring into a literal fucking sun is a bad idea, then let me show you this little piece of insight. According to science.org, staring into the sun or any other bright light such as a welding torch will in fact damage your eyes. I know, crazy right? This is because ultraviolet light will flood your retina, literally burning the exposed tissue. Short-term damage would include sunburn of the cornea, which leads to light sensitivity and pain, with symptoms showing up to 24 hours after initial exposure. More serious damage would include something known as solar retinopathy, which occurs when UV light literally burns a hole in the center of the retinal tissue, creating a blind spot in the center of the eye for the victim, known as scotoma. I can't imagine anyone in this room needing to maybe perhaps keep their eyesight. Please, for the love of God, remember to take sunglasses with you when driving and never ever look directly into a bright light. As a final point, I'd actually like to list a handful of characters from other media that can be argued to be arrogant, but also aren't as stupid as Otto and take some level of precautions for their plans. The first one I'd like to mention is a maniacal madman set out on global conquest. Someone who is rich beyond belief and a pain in your ass for as long as you know him. His name is Handsome Jack from Borderlands 2. During the events of the game, Jack is repeatedly shown making your life difficult, whether it be sending waves of enemy drones to overwhelm you and your allies, nuking your home base from orbit after pretending to give you a new shield that would be used to power your base's defenses, only to knock it down, killing and kidnapping your allies, unleashing an ancient planet-destroying alien entity completely under his control just to kill you and the rest those he deems to be bandits, or even blowing up the train you are on before the opening cinematic finishes, leaving you to freeze to death before you have a chance to hold your first weapon. A very obvious key trait of Jack throughout the game is his obnoxious levels of arrogance. During your playthrough, he communicates to you via codec and taunts you as you are repeatedly fooled by his plans.
That is why you don't screw with me. You and your little friend Mordecai turn yourselves in, or that dumbass bird is just the beginning. I love the way you Vault Hunters just up and trusted Angel. Never occurred to you that she was working for me, did it? I did the same thing to the last 4 Vault Hunters, but I'll be entirely honest. Tricking you guys this time? Way funnier. You feel that? That electricity in the air when you're just aching to murder someone? Haven't felt that in such a long time.
Even when you appear to have the upper hand and storm the holding cell of his daughter to destroy any hopes of him gaining access to the warrior, he still berates you and promises that he will kill everyone you know and love, while sending waves of enemies to kill you. The game even accounts for why he doesn't show up himself to fight you to protect his daughter, when Angel says he is too much of a coward. Only after she dies does he show up to immediately mop the floor with the 2 most powerful characters in the game within seconds, as well as almost killing you in the process if it wasn't for the aid of Lilith, using her last fragment of will, showing you he means business. He also acknowledges that the only reason he is here now is because he has nothing left to lose, and arriving has acquired the aid of the most powerful siren on the planet, meaning his plans are still capable of being carried out. Even when he loses, he still has the upper hand, and unlike Otto, Jack had multiple safety precautions put in place to avoid losing his daughter, putting her in the most secure location on the planet, and throwing everything he has at you, while also thinking you wouldn't make it. He is arrogant without a doubt, but he isn't fucking stupid. He knows what you're capable of and makes sure you can't just stroll into his most guarded location.
I'm racking my brain trying to think of a name for that diamond pony I bought. I was gonna call it Piss for Brains in honor of you, but that just feels immature. Hey, maybe Bud Stallion? Nah, that's even worse. I'll tell you what, I'll give it some more thought. Consider this your final warning. No, consider this my final warning. Turn around and I promise I'll make it quick. But I swear, you take one more step Every soul back in Sanctuary will die staring at their own lungs as I rip them from their chests.
Ah, but this isn't fair now, is it? I can't just use a video game character to make an accurate comparison to a movie character now, can I? Especially since we spent far more time with Jack. Okay, fine, I'm cool with that. Why don't we stick strictly to movie characters? Well then, how about my second example? A galactic tyrant bent on reducing the population of every planet he visits by half because he believes this is the best road to salvation. I am of course referring to the Mad Titan Thanos. The Infinity War version, not that cartoon and in-game. Thanos is an entity of immense power and is one of the few beings in the universe strong enough to wield multiple Infinity Stones without harming his body, something that has been shown before to kill most creatures. Throughout the course of the Marvel movies, Thanos has been sending envoys to many planets he knows house Infinity Stones in order for them to be brought back to him, all the while sitting on his throne as he watches from a distance. His plans nearly worked multiple times had they not been fooled by the actions of a few powerful individuals throughout the universe. But eventually, Thanos decides to take up the fight himself, and before we get a glimpse of him in his first proper movie, he already wields the Power Stone. We find out later from Thor that he acquired the stone after laying waste to an entire planet, taking the stone by force, proving he is indeed a mighty adversary. But besides this, we get an actual glimpse of his raw power as he easily decimates Hulk, one of the original and most powerful Avengers, within seconds, despite being surprise attacked. What makes this an impressive feat is that not once did Thanos call for aid. His general, Ebony Maw, even advises his sibling to not interfere and to allow Thanos to have his fun. Now when watching this for the first time in cinemas, I thought this meant we were going to get a demonstration of Thanos using his newly acquired Power Stone to defeat Hulk. After all, Hulk is strong, but is he stronger than the power of the universe?
These carriers can use the stone to mow down entire civilizations like wheat in a field.
But, surprisingly, Thanos does not use his most powerful ability to instantly end the fight. He instead engages in actual mortal combat with Hulk and beats him using his own skills and strength. This is one of the many times in this movie where Thanos doesn't use the power of the stones to instantly win every fight he is in, because he is arrogant enough to believe he doesn't need to. What makes this even scarier is, he's right.
I like you.
On Titan, he uses the bare minimum abilities of the stones to defeat the Avengers and never kills them, preferring to allow the Snap to decide if they are willing to live. Well, besides Iron Man. And at the end of the movie, he wins. He succeeds in his mission to reduce the world, nay, the universe, to 50% of its population, all the while keeping every Avenger, with the exception of Vision, alive.
I know what it's like to lose. Feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail nonetheless. It's frightening. Turns the legs to jelly. If I ask you to what end? Dread it? Run from it? Destiny arrives all the same. And now it's here. Or should I say, I am.
Oh, but this isn't fair either, is it? I can't be allowed to compare a movie that came out 16 years ago to something as recent as Avengers Infinity War, can I? Okay, well then, why don't I look at an example of arrogance that came up before Spider-Man 2? How about 20 years before? A movie that introduced a character in charge of an entire galactic empire. Someone so powerful he was the master of the antagonist for the two previous movies. I'm of course referring to Emperor Sheev Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious. When our main character Luke meets him, we find out that the Emperor has known about the mission to the forest moon of Endor the entire time, and has sprung a trap for Luke's friends on the surface. He is also working his way into Luke's mind, trying to get him to convert to the dark side like his father before him, the Emperor's current pupil and second strongest being in the galaxy. What makes the Emperor so arrogant is that he believes Anakin is all but forgotten in Vader, that the only thing left in his robotic apprentice is the cold hard void of the dark side. And so with this belief, he tortures Luke in front of Vader, believing he is one. And honestly, I don't blame him. Vader was responsible for the destruction of the Old Republic, deaths of many Jedi, both young and old, as well as the incineration of an entire planet. He was about as evil as they came.
Your feelings have now betrayed her too. Obi-Wan was wise to hide her from me. Now his failure is complete. If you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will.
What he overlooked was the compassion Luke had for his father. This compassion is what led Vader to killing Palpatine, but not before the Emperor could send shockwaves of Sith lightning through his metallic body, almost killing him in the process. A big reason the Rebellion also won their skirmish on the moon was luck.
Blind, stupid, simple, doodah, clueless.
Honestly, the Emperor was right to think he won. Fuck these teddy bears. And as a last example, I've decided to be as fair as I possibly can be to this movie. Why don't I use an example of an arrogant villain from a superhero movie that came out around the same time? How about Magneto from the first two X-Men movies, since both released before Spider-Man 2 and are pretty well regarded by the general audience. In these movies, Magneto is one of the most powerful characters to be introduced, possessing the ability to control metal with his mind, showing no sign of strain as he does it. He can toss cars into the sky, stop a bullet after it's been fired, destroy entire train cars, and play with Wolverine like a Barbie doll, considering his entire skeleton is coated in metal. Quite frankly, the only person on the planet who would stand a chance of beating him would seem to be his former best friend, Charles Xavier, who has the power of telepathy and is shown capable of controlling people's thoughts and actions. To combat this, Magneto possesses a helmet capable of neutralizing this threat. Yet the first time we are introduced to him, he is walking about the place without it, despite knowing Charles can prod around with no difficulty and neutralize him without a fuss. At another point of the movie, when Charles threatens to kill him, Magneto responds by holding an entire police force hostage and almost kills an officer with his own gun.
Gotta press your luck, Charles.
Magneto is an absolute baller in this movie, and takes no one's shit, while grinning the entire time. And yet he is a weaker villain than Dock Ock? Fucking hell.
Pyro.
By the talent you have there, Pyro.
I can only manipulate. I can't create it.
You are a god among insects. Never let anyone tell you different.
I hope this list of villains is enough for those of you watching to understand that simply having the title of arrogance given to you does not excuse your idiotic behavior as a villain, especially when there are great examples of intelligent and effective arrogant villains in other media. I also want to bring everyone's attention to something else I noticed in this scene. After Rossie says to Otto he needs to get some sleep before his big day, Otto responds to her by saying,
Did Edison sleep before he turned on the light? Did Marconi sleep before he turned on the radio? Did Beethoven sleep before he wrote the Fifth?
Did Bernoulli sleep before he found the curves of quickest descent?
Now the reason I am pointing this out is because it has come to my attention there are those of you watching this, and many more who will never see this, who believe that this is the first time Otto will be testing his machine, with the common line of thinking being, scientists just don't do demonstrations without testing the experiment beforehand, such as this lovely individual.
Which he has almost certainly experienced before and thought this was the same. You think scientists just do demonstrations without having done the experiments beforehand?
Yes.
But if this isn't the first time Otto is testing this machine, then why does he say this here? Surely if he has done successful tests before this demonstration, he would be overconfident with his experiments the next day. Possibly a little arrogant? I don't know. But he isn't. He's nervous. He can't sleep. Or perhaps he's overexcited to be activating this machine. But at the same time, surely he would know how important sleep would be to him before activating such a dangerous piece of equipment. The slightest miscalculation and you blow up the city. Or did he adjust his calculations to account for lack of sleep and too much coffee? Another thing is, if this isn't the first time he would have experienced a spike, then surely he would know this can happen. Surely he would understand the need for a protective sheet of glass at the very least to avoid having anyone losing their belongings. A previous test would also indicate the need for a stronger containment field, would it not? Because, as we can see here, there's some sort of field preventing the solar flares from escaping and damaging the nearby area, with the arms acting as backup. We are also told here by Otto that he is capable of increasing the strength of the containment field.
What?
Increasing the strength of the containment field.
What?
Meaning this experiment could very likely be a success if he used the same amount of vibranium, or I mean tritium, by just increasing the strength of the field, preventing any flares from escaping, and potentially negating the need for his arms post-installation. Again, just a number of things Otto himself would have been able to figure out on his own had he done this experiment beforehand as a safety test. I want you all to keep this in mind by the time I get to the second attempt at this experiment. But with that said, we shall proceed with the adaptive PowerPoint presentation. After a spot of brown nosing from Peter, Rossie asks Peter if he has a girlfriend, and Peter struggles to answer the question, eventually saying he doesn't really know. The answer is no, Peter. You do not have a girlfriend. And the woman you are currently fawning over has a boyfriend, who she is using to manipulate you. God damn, do I not like this bitch. After giving this answer, Otto responds by giving the audience yet another theme for the movie, which is then explored later as Peter literally gets lovesick. Otto and Rossie then have a cute little account of how they met, and Otto parts some wise words of wisdom to Peter about the seductive power of poetry.
Salsa water and lemon for blood. Or wear red. Dumbass.
After that, we then get a scene of Peter getting ready for MJ's play, as he decides which suit he's going to wear. Spoilers, he wears both. During the scene, we get a not so subtle look at Peter's mental state, as the song choice basically tells you what he is thinking. It's kind of funny, honestly. Pair this up with the scene he has visiting the doctor, and you have to start wearing an anti-bonk helmet to protect you from the amount of times this movie beats you over the head with its message. Peter's life sucks. He doesn't know who he is anymore. He wants a ginger minge. Where's the money, Lebowski?
Liam and me, we're gonna fuck you up.
But anyhow, during the dress-up scene, before Peter goes to see MJ's play, we get a snippet of him looking at the ticket he managed to purchase. And if we look at the bottom right-hand side, we can see he managed to spend $35 for a general admittance ticket. Now, for those of you who watched this movie as much as I did, this might not be a surprise to you. However, where this becomes an issue is when he doesn't make the show, and he has to talk to MJ the next morning to explain why he couldn't make it. But I'll save this for when I get there. I just want you all to keep in mind not only the existence of this ticket, but also how much it costs. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean there isn't a problem already in the scene, which is that Peter was already late. We know this because after he leaves the apartment, we see the doors to the theater have already opened and ushers are accepting tickets. Not to mention that we see one of the members of staff working backstage, calling MJ and her co-worker, telling them they have 5 minutes before the show starts. All the while this is happening, Peter is still buying flowers and is still a ways off before he makes it to the show, on a Saturday evening, in New York City. Any of you who've gone out on weekends know how busy this shit can get. Why would Peter leave this up to last minute? Whatever. I can also believe he used his advance payment he took from Betty to pay for this ticket, since there's no way he paid for it after that point. So after Peter picks up his flowers, he hops back on the bike and is on his way to the show. And here we are introduced to the reason he misses the play, a car chase in progress. The chase shows up behind him until... oh boy, would you look at that. The car nearly drove into Peter, and his reaction didn't even have that handy little sound cue from the first movie. The same exact one that shows up in the cafe scene. Now for those of you who are new here and didn't watch my first video, link in the description, I talked in depth about Peter's abysmal spider sense in the first movie, and how it was inconsistently applied across the board. One of these times was when we got our first proper look at William Dafoe's Green Goblin. Because in this scene, Peter's spider sense went off when Goblin was A, out of sight, and B, didn't pose a direct threat to him at the time. This meant that Peter has always had the ability to detect danger from far away that doesn't even mean harm to himself. And we get another demonstration of this in the finale when he detects the glider before it moves with the intent to kill. This also meant that when it came to Peter, you very likely couldn't surprise attack him, especially since this is 2 years later and Peter has had much more time to be attuned to his powers. It's such a shame this movie kind of forgot Peter could do that, which means he will not only be late to the MJ's play, which he was never going to make on time anyways, so whatever, but he also had this motorcycle run over and basically destroyed, meaning he lost his only mode of non-Spidey related transportation, which is a rather convenient reason he can't make MJ's play, don't you think? Oh ho 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 ho! This is going to be fun. I'm not going to readdress points about Peter's spider sense any further unless I feel it is uniquely absurd, so I'll leave this point as is. Just be aware that this will not be the only time continuity from the first movie will end up hurting this one and very likely will change the third. We then get a cute little moment where Peter talks to two kids on the sidewalk as they ask him how he did that backflip, while a getaway car is driving in front of him, potentially causing more and more damage. What makes it worse is when we find out they have guns. You guys remember how in TASM 2, the film starts with Peter trying to stop a heavy truck from causing more harm, but instead of doing it immediately, he tries making fun of the driver, leading to even more damage as well as a very likely increase in lives lost? Yeah, this scene, while not as bad, is still similar in that aspect. Peter really should have gotten to work instead of striking this pose and chatting to these kids. But fuck it, broccoli.
Superhero landing. You gotta do a superhero landing. Wait for it. Woo! Superhero landing. Yeah, that's really hard on your knees. Totally impractical. They all do it.
Workout? You also notice how there are two cops standing right behind Peter in this shot? Yeah, I'll get to that one in a second. The scene continues with the car thieves still being pursued by cops, with them retaliating by firing a shotgun. This then causes an accident which sends a car skyrocketing into the air and about to crash a handful of civilians. It's stopped in the nick of time as we see Spider-Man emerging from behind the car, showing he is capable of sniping moving targets with his webs even while in motion. Yet another ability I'm sure we're going to be seeing used very frequently in this movie. We then get this admittedly cool shot as he pursues the car thieves, which allows us to see Spidey demonstrating his ability to dodge gunfire from far enough distance while already being mobile. This then brings into question what factors need to be put in place for him to dodge shots fired, and if there's a minimum safe distance he needs to be for this to happen. Because I imagine he wouldn't be able to do this at a close enough distance. Another thing I noticed with the aid of my mate Uvu was that during the chase scene there appears to be a few issues. The first being that the gun in the passenger seat switches from a shotgun to a machine gun and back to a shotgun mid-frame. Hell, even when he fires a shotgun, the first time it appears as if he shot it twice in rapid succession, similar to the burst fire mode from Doom 2016. The second issue being him just straight up missing Spider-Man when he is right in front of him. I can understand him missing here since Spidey is fast and agile character, but we have already been shown this thug can shoot a moving target if it is behind him. He misses 3 times at a target swinging right in front of him. Shandy, you are nitpicking again.
Yes.
So after Spider-Man apprehends the 2 car assailants, we have Peter eventually arriving at MJ's play, while looking unkempt, as well as driving the stolen vehicle. So as we will be made aware in a few short minutes, as well as what we know from the first movie, the way Peter changes into his alter ego is by ripping off whatever clothing he has on him at the time to reveal the spider suit underneath, and he presumably leaves those clothes on the floor where he got changed. So this means that not only did he leave his clothes behind when getting changed to stop the car, meaning he had to go get them back before arriving here, but he also did it while driving the stolen vehicle. Now I know this may be considered as cheating, but at this point I just do not care. I'm going to be using a clip from the 2.1 cut of this movie, which adds a few deleted scenes not found in the theatrical cut. This is because it gives us a clearer idea of what happened after Peter stops the crime. And what do we find out when he stopped it? He continues to drive the car while taking his mask off, meaning he drove it back to the alleyway he undressed and then continued to the play with everyone able to get a clear look of who is driving the car, both in and out of the spider suit. All the while the police are probably looking for the car he is driving. This is fucking hilarious. Not to mention, we already know Peter's web swinging is faster than driving. He would have made better time swinging back to his clothes and getting changed closer to the play, while also not being in possession of a crime-related vehicle. While also not showing his face to everyone he drives past in full Spider-Man get-up, you fucking... Think, Mark! Think! When Peter arrives at the play, he gets stopped by an officer who tells him he will be towed if he doesn't move his car, since he's in a no parking zone, which Peter then ignores. Now remember these two? Yeah, it's about time we talked about them. What do you think happened after they saw Peter do this? Do you think they ran over to see if he was okay? Perhaps ask him if he needs a hospital? No? Okay, fine, fair enough. The police in this movie don't do much besides gawk, so I don't really blame you. That's actually what I thought they were doing as well. Standing by and watching, doing nothing. This would then also mean they stood by and watched as a man who just did an acrobatic backflip off of a moving scooter before a car drove over him, ran into an alleyway only to have Spider-Man come out afterwards. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very simple question for you. Do you know how easy it would be for the police to figure out Spider-Man's true identity? If you don't, then allow me to explain. All these cops have to do is look at the license plate of Peter's totaled scooter to find out who owns it. It's that easy. But there is a bit of information that is lacking here, so why don't I add that in then? Peter gets told by a cop when he arrives at the play that he's going to tow the car if he leaves it parked there. This is the same car wanted by the police for aiding the two thieves. Now when police find out this is the same car, they are going to want to know how it got here. This will then lead to them questioning the towing officer, who is then going to give them a description of the man who drove it. Considering this description matches the one of the man who ran off after his bike was totaled, it would then mean that the police have a good reason to suspect who Peter is, considering there is no way he could have possibly made it to the play in that car unless he was Spider-Man, which multiple eyewitnesses can confirm. They could also ask the theatre and any nearby venues with CCTV if they could access their cameras. Now what were to happen if they were to do a background check on Peter before trying to accuse him of anything? Well then, now we have a problem. They would find out he works at the Daily Bugle and is the only person credited for taking pictures of Spider-Man. If they keep going, they would find out a whole lot more. Let's list them, why don't we? 1. His uncle died a few years ago, and the person accused of the murder was found dead soon afterwards, with the only suspect being a man who dressed up in a spider-themed outfit, managing to evade the police after being given a warning. 2. His aunt was attacked by the Green Goblin in her home, despite having no probable reason to be attacked. 3. His place of work was attacked, with the assailant asking for the identity of the photographer who takes the pictures of Spider-Man. 4. His best friend's dad died the night the Green Goblin disappeared, after kidnapping his childhood friend. 5. And if they could find this record, they would find out he attended a cage match against an undisputed champ while winning within 2 minutes under the alias of Spider-Man. All of this added nonsense to your already busted movie because you just had to have him drive the fucking stolen car, you lemon. You couldn't have just had Peter behaving like a normal person in the scene and, for one, have him be at the play on time but leave before the doors close to stop a crime in progress, and for 2, just not have him drive this thing here? By Jim Carrey's unwashed arsehole. Why did this have to be so fucking complicated? Anyways, moving on. Peter walks into the play where we are introduced to Bruce Campbell playing a different character to the one from the first film, who refuses to grant Peter access to the theatre while the play is proceeding. Fun fact, Bruce Campbell was supposed to return in Spider-Man 4 as a Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, in an opening scene where Peter handed him over to the police, ending his trail of cameos. Now I know some people think this usher is an arsehole, but like, Peter knew this was the case. It's written on his ticket. Not an issue, mind you, he probably just tried to charm his way in. It happens. So after Peter's denied entry, he goes to sulk outside as this lovely lady starts singing a rendition of the 1960 Spider-Man TV show. Some time passes, the play ends, and people start walking out, with MJ following right behind. Peter gets up to say hello, but not before MJ is approached by her new stud muffin. I have to ask MJ a question here. If Peter did make it on time to your play, and you saw him sitting in the only empty seat in the theatre, odd that you'd expect him to be there when you've only found out he was coming the night before, but okay, then what was your plan after that? We see you embracing John as soon as you see him, so it clearly wasn't because you wanted to hook up with Peter. I still can't get over how much of a gigabit you were in this scene. Peter gave up his hard-earned money for you. He spent what little finances he had and what little time his life could afford him to support you and your passion. It's one thing for a person with money to spend to be able to make it to your play. It's another thing entirely when someone with nothing tries to do the same thing. And this is the way you treated him when you found out? You are a vile and despicable person. I hope your chips get stuck in your teeth, your nails are always dirty, and your YouTube videos always buffer. Just as Peter was about to be cucked in person, he sees a few police cars driving past him, which means he has to get to work, fleeing the scene before MJ has a chance to see him. He runs into a nearby alleyway and gets changed in the span of a couple of seconds, leaving his clothes behind on the floor again, not even webbing them up to a wall to prevent others from stealing his clothes. Alright then. As he swings up above the police cars, he unfortunately fails to shoot another web, causing him to crash to the ground. I don't have anything to add to this besides mentioning how much that fall looked like it hurt, even though he got up without a complaint. I wonder if his durability in this movie will at least be consistent. I also have nothing to say about the elevator scene, it's just funny. As Peter returns to ground level, we see that he managed to retrieve his unsoiled dry clothes, as well as his completely wrecked bike, which means he is now also carrying the perfect excuse for not making it to MJ's play in his hand. Great idea! This, along with your unused ticket, is the perfect set of evidence you'd need to show MJ to try and amend any broken promises. There is no way she wouldn't be able to forgive you for this, right? All he'd need to do is go to her home and see her in person, which I'm sure he could accomplish using a similar method to Norman from the first movie. Who is the asshole that keeps putting up these posters in this one spot? They were supposed to go around the city, not just this one isolated area, you unwashed rugby sock. And so we start off the next scene with Peter using a payphone. But why? You could have just gone to see her in person. It would have been much easier for you to explain it, and you don't even have the money to do this. You know you don't have the money to do this. Peter, you fucking moron! You have the perfect fucking reason for not being able to make it to her show. You were carrying that reason with you back to your apartment last night. Why are you trying to use the usher as an excuse, you baked bum cheese? Peter Parker is brilliant, my ass. Why are you making this so needlessly complicated? Unless MJ is in the business of being a bitch despite being given very legitimate reasons for ditching, then even she and her cuntly face would be able to understand why you couldn't make it. I mean, this is possibly the easiest lie you could have, since 50% of it is true anyway. You don't have to mention the crime being stopped, you can just tell her you were in a bike accident and prove it to her using the bike as evidence. This wouldn't even be against your character. You've already been shown to be a quick thinker when it comes to lying on the spot, in your first movie. Yeah, you had the entire night to come up with an excuse and this was the best you had? Pathetic. So, this might get me into some trouble. See, here's the thing. I don't actually like the idea of hiding your secret identity from the people you love and care for, especially if you still choose to have them be a part of your life. And the reason for that is to do with the logic of what would happen if villains find out who you are. If someone like Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, Sandman, or any other number of his rogues gallery finds out who you are using means not at all related to those you care for, just like how Goblin figured it out in the last movie, then how does your loved ones not knowing who you are help your situation if they are captured anyways? If anything, having someone know who you are would likely help you avoid any unnecessary grief with them, kind of like how it worked in the Tazza movies, or Spider-Verse, or even Homecoming. I'm not saying you need to reveal yourself to the world, mind you, only that the logic of not revealing it to anyone seems kind of unnecessary. Now mind you, I am sort of case by case with this. I'm perfectly okay with Matt Murdock, for instance, not telling Foggy Nelson who he really is, because it goes against what they stand for as a firm. There it makes complete sense for me. I also understand when a hero has difficulty opening up or doesn't feel comfortable telling people who they really are, and so I wouldn't expect them to reveal their identity until they feel ready to do so. However, if the reason used is because you want to ensure their safety and nothing else, especially if they are already a part of your life, then it makes much more sense for you to tell them. But hey, that's just me, and I'm not going to say Peter choosing to keep his identity is a flaw, so I'll just move on. The next scene shows us Ock getting his arms, and it is here where we find out they have been programmed with the sole purpose of creating successful fusion. We also find out that they have an artificial intelligence controlling them, which is why Ock created the inhibitor chip to prevent them from taking over his higher brain functions. But what would the purpose of an AI so powerful it could overtake your higher brain functions serve if you were just trying to swat away a few flares? They are additional limbs, not fucking Jaeger pilots. Why would you create something that could potentially take control of you? I'm not saying I dislike the idea of creating an AI, mind you. I do like it, but for an entirely different, far more smug reason. But I'll get to that when we reach the second experiment. Although, what even is the purpose of connecting these arms to a living host? If you had an AI built for successful fusion, then why even attach these arms? Why not just create a machine that will maintain the fusion 24/7? Whoops, and there I go spoiling the surprise. Guess you're going to have to wait on that one, huh? So Otto begins the experiment by placing a small amount of tritium into what we can assume is some sort of magnetic field to explain why it's held in midair. I How? How do you start this experiment here in this room surrounded by all these people and just not think, maybe I should have some sort of safety net just in case something goes awry? If only there was a Spider-Man movie where the main villain was doing an experiment that was very dangerous, but he still conducted them safely with a number of tests. And his scientists, who were protected by a sheet of glass in another room several meters away from the actual experiment, advised him against the use of the machine for fear of creating potential problems. If only this hypothetical superior movie made the villain a person capable of having enough power and wealth that he could perform this very dangerous experiment within city limits, but without any sort of approval from the city and without needing any sort of permit. Man, if this movie existed, I imagine everyone would acknowledge it as far superior because it just gets rid of all the unnecessary issues, now wouldn't it? Too bad this hypothetical movie just doesn't exist. And just think about that for a quick second. Apparently someone working in the city council thought it was a good idea to give the stamp of approval to this experiment and grace them with a permit.
How does it feel to have lived long enough to see all of your favorite franchises go down in flames?
Feels great.
So as the experiment unsurprisingly starts to fail, we see that Peter leaves the room just before anything major happens, to quickly get changed. Much to Harry's shock. Now, this wouldn't really happen had Peter explained his unique situation to Harry, but whatever. I'm sure he doesn't really value his friendship. This just means that when Spider-Man saves him in a second, he should be kind of questioning how he got there so fast. And to be fair to the movie, he does do that after the machine is turned off. But what about the fact he never questions why Peter abandoned him, despite Harry being the reason Peter is here in the first place? That would really mess with your head if your childhood friend just abandons you, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, look at me using my adult brain to criticize this kid's movie. I almost forgot about this garbage.
I'm in charge here! It's my money! I'm in charge!
For fuck's sake, why are you in this movie, Harry, you whiny little shit? I am so happy we got the meme machine you became in number 3. I don't think I could have stood another movie with this bratty attitude. So after Peter saves Harry, he decides to intervene in the experiment by pulling the plug, leading to Otto smacking him unconscious for about 24 seconds. Oh Spidey, I see your durability is as wonky as ever. Apparently getting smacked by this tentacle into a wall knocked the wind out of you, despite us being shown in a previous scene that you can fall from several meters in the air onto this pipe and not only survive, but get up with zero problem. Need I bring up the shit you tanked in the last video? Oh well, as long as it doesn't happen again. Also, Otto just tried to murder Spider-Man before even being converted by the tentacles. We just saw him do it. He smacked him really hard and it broke a brick wall. We know Otto is capable of grabbing things. We see it in this very scene. So why would you smack a superhero this hard? Unless Spider-Man really is just a criminal in this world. More on that later. Like, if Otto is this willing to harm another person, and is this irresponsible with people's lives, including his own fucking wife, then it makes far too much sense that he would be willing to kill Spider-Man as soon as possible, which makes this scene a little bit more wonky. Oh my god, this movie is terrible! Rossie, what the fuck are you still doing here? This is the exact same bullshit from the first movie, only self-inflicted now. People try to defend Rossie's inaction here by bringing up that she is frozen in fear and can't even move if she wanted to. But look at her! She has enough of her wits left to try and crawl into the wall like Jerry the house mouse, yet she doesn't even bother trying to raise her arms and protect her face. A reactionary impulse so ingrained into our survival instincts, you'd have to actively force yourself not to do it. Ock even does it in a split second before it hits him. The movie is even proving my point. This scene is trying to have its cake and eat it too. Rossie is simultaneously too scared to move, but also cognitive enough to scream her tits off. She has somehow activated both parts of the fight or flight mechanic, but was too retarded to duck and cover her face. If she was genuinely too scared to move, she wouldn't have flapped her gums like that. She would have just stood there, dead as the grave while the danger approached, like a deer in the headlights.
No! What are you doing? Put me down, you bastard!
Do you want to know something funny? Spider-Man could have saved Rossie's life here, had Otto just not knocked him out. Not a flaw, mind you. I just giggled. I swear to God, I'm about to go off again. Buckle up, baby. Look at this. Do you see what's wrong with this image? Well, if you don't, then you're in for a rude awakening. According to the other scientists in the room, this artificial sun is exceeding a 1000 megawatt surplus while it is still under control. Now, while it is never stated that the energy output increases when the sun gets bigger, I'd like to think this would likely happen, since the sun at the end of the movie is much bigger and exceeds this one in power. In fact, the longer these suns are active, it seems the bigger and stronger their magnetic field becomes, so it's very likely it would produce more power. But for simplicity's sake, I will keep its energy output at 1000 megawatts. With that said, would you like to know how much electrical current a human can realistically survive? According to that website, a human being can suffer muscle paralysis with as little as 10 milliamps. This current is increased to 30 and it will lead to victims suffering from respiratory paralysis, meaning their lungs aren't working. Increasing this further to 75 milliamps causes ventricular fibrillation. Yes, meaning a very rapid, ineffective heartbeat, which can lead to death if there isn't a this thing on hand. Heart paralysis occurs at 4 amps, meaning no heartbeat. Tissue starts to burn at around 5 amps. At 10 amps, the victim goes into cardiac arrest with very severe electric burns, death being very probable. Now, would you like to know how many amps are in 1 megawatt? I will give you a few seconds to guess. Fucking 1 million. 1 million amps is what you will find in 1 megawatt. This fucking thing exceeds 1000 megawatts. Screw singeing his clothes, his entire body should be a charred pile of smoke. What makes this worse is when he does it the second time around. Otto stabs a cable generating even more voltage than what is being used to make this sun while wet. According to this same website I used, greater voltages produce greater currents, leading to a greater danger from higher voltages. However, resistances can hinder voltage, with higher resistances being capable of reducing the current. Dry human skin may have a natural resistance of 100,000 ohms, which is a unit of measuring electrical resistance. But when wet, this reduces to 1000 ohms of resistance. The wet skin allows for current to pass more easily into the body and gives a greater shock. What makes it worse is this is salt water, which is a conductor. Dock Ock is far more than just dead. He's been snapped from existence. He shouldn't even have skin left on his body. I think I might unironically hate this movie now. Goddamn. Oh, and you know I'm going to be hit with the argument of, it's a comic book movie, why are you trying to apply logic to it? It's not like it's a cartoon. Well, it's probably for the same reason you apply logic to any movie or show you watch. You are trying to make sense of what you are shown on screen. And why can't a superhero movie or any other property try to be more logically sound? Take the point I made earlier about wearing protective eyewear. Do you want to know another superhero movie that takes this into account? The motion picture in question is Captain America: The First Avenger. During the super soldier experiment, we see every involved member of staff, with one exception, wearing some sort of protective eyewear. When Steve cries out in pain, their first reaction is to shut down the experiment, before Steve reassures them he can do it. They even allocate all of the onlookers into another separate room, away from the actual experiment, while protecting them behind a sheet of glass. But I'm not going to hear any of you dingleberries complaining this scene made too much sense now, am I? Even the Nazis use safety procedures. Anyways, before I get too grouchy, let's move on with the movie.